Hey everyone, this is Caleb Corey coming back at you once again. Today we're going to be reviewing Whale Fall by Elizabeth O'Connor. This is a very great book and we're going to talk about it a little bit. First we're going to go over the general summary, what the book is about. Then we'll go over sort of the things that I liked about it. We'll talk about the author a little bit, but we're going to mostly stick to the book itself. And I'll go over a few quotations from the book that I really liked as well. So the book, it really follows Maynard and her family who live on a fishing island off the coast of the British Islands. And these are actually based upon real people. There are fishermen, fishermen, islanders that lived on the Enad Islands and were sort of similar to the characters in the cast of this book. And you can tell the author has really researched the surrounding folklore and especially the people that have actually lived on islands like this and have gradually had to move to the mainland, which would be like England, Ireland, the places, or the actual, places in the British Isles that are referred to as the mainland in the book. So it's following these islanders, and it's a small knit group of people. I think it mentions like 30 or 40, or that's kind of what I assume is on the island. Very small group of people. And eventually, Maynard is encountered by these English people who've come over from the mainland. I think they're from England or London, somewhere on the mainland. And they're coming to write a book about the people that live on the island. And this is very interesting, and it's this really cool story. There's a lot of like friendship and betrayal, and something that's interesting about the book, or just a cool portion of the book that Elizabeth O'Connor kind of writes and the reader can pick up on, is you're looking at the traditionalist view of women, because this book is written in the 1930s. So it's in 1938 that this book is set. So it's just at the very beginning of World War II. And again, this traditionalist mindset towards women is even more prevalent because the people on the island are not acclimated to typical society. They're more shaped by the views and prejudices that they have on the island. And one of those prejudices happens to be misogyny towards women, which is really unfortunate, and it really makes you sympathize with Maynard and her desire to move to the mainland and further her education and really acclimate herself into modern day society. And what I really like about this book is it shows how much women have progressed in society from the times when they were heavily prejudiced against because of their gender. Something I wrote in just a note about the book was that I can't imagine being discriminated against for my gender. I think it's truly awful that things like that happened in the past, and I think this book does a really good job of showing that the horrors of allowing people to discriminate based on gender. And I think it really shows the progress that women have made when an author with a PhD in literature comes out and writes a book like this, and people can go and enjoy it. And just it's really nice to see that women have taken their proper place in society. I think that's a very good part of the book, maybe one of the themes or messages of the book underlying the plot. But the overall plot is really interesting because you're following Maynard, who's translating for these English people that have come over, and she's trying to help them write this book. And initially, you kind of like hope. Well, I don't want to ruin the story, but that's the gist of it. So it's really interesting, and I think something else the author is really good at in this book is the descriptions of the scenery. I think on the flap, the cover of the novel, it sort of talks about her writing about coastal landscapes. I think that was part of her PhD program, and it really shows through in this book because some of the writing is just absolutely beautiful and magnificent. I've read one other book by someone from the British Isles, someone from the British Isles, by Claire Keegan specifically, and she wrote some similar scenic, like beautiful scenery and landscapes in this book here, So Late in the Day, which I just reviewed. But I think just because like how beautiful the scenery and the landscape is over in Ireland and Britain and just those places over there in the British Isles and the UK, I think because those authors have lived there and they write down what they've seen in their books, it really just shows through. And also I think it speaks to the quality of the writer as well, because just because you've seen landscapes like that doesn't mean you can write them beautifully. And when an author can actually describe scenes like this and paint that like portrait for the reader and have such great imagery, it just really speaks to the quality of the author. And I think that's probably one of my favorite parts of the book. Like I said, there is some betrayal in the story, and I think the point of showing the progression of women is really great. I really like that they do that in this book. Continuing, there's a whale that washes up on the shore of the island, and that's kind of where Whalefall, the title of the book, comes from. Ironically, I originally thought this book was another book that I heard. I think it's Jack Edwards here on YouTube. He had reviewed one called, I think it's Evenings and Weekends. I almost picked that book up today. I may have to still go and get it because it sounds very interesting. But in that story as well, there's a whale that washes up, and I think it's in like the harbor of London or someplace like that. But my brain was connecting that book review with this book, and these are two completely different books, but I'm still glad that I picked this up. But moving on from that comparison, a whale washes up onto the island, and this sort of sets the pace for the novel, because gradually as the whale decomposes and eventually people come and they harvest like the blubber and the things that they're going to use for different things that they use during the time period. I think they said they're going to use it for food at one point, which is definitely not something I don't think it's something we do now, but I know there are a lot of uses for the different parts of whales, or at least there was when whaling was still a thing. And I don't think I'm not sure if whaling was still legal at this time or not, but regardless, I know there are a lot of different uses for the parts of a whale. And that's because I've read Moby Dick, which all of these books, like the book Evenings and Weekends and Whalefall, it's interesting because I would kind of wonder if they're sort of referencing towards Moby Dick or like doing a passing reference to these novels. And it seems like they may be kind of paying reverence to Herman Melville and Moby Dick. But the difference between this and Moby Dick is the whale sort of like sets the pacing as the whale is decomposing and the characters are interacting with it on the island. The book continues through the months of the year. But in Moby Dick, the whale, the white whale, Moby Dick, is literally the focus of the entire book. Captain Ahab is on this monomaniac quest to find the whale and kill it because it took its leg. But in this book, it's sort of in the background, so it's not as prevalent as it is in Moby Dick. But it's still really interesting, and I think it really helps with the pacing of the novel, because you're thinking about that and you're imagining the whale slowly decomposing and then the seabirds coming and picking at it, and the novel continues to progress. And I think that's a very nice way to do that. One thing about the whale that I thought was really interesting is one of the characters, he kind of like acts petulant, like a child, when he realizes the whale isn't like bright blue, it's like pale gray, and when his imagination was trying to make it out to be more than it is. And I think this is kind of speaking to the English people in the novel, specifically kind of trying to show that there's trying to exaggerate the events of the island. And this kind of is revealed that this is from like inspired by a true story at a note on the text at the very end of the novel. So I was speaking of the Aran Islands, and there was a documentary about it that Robert J. Flaherty made in 1931. And when he was making this documentary of the Aran Island people, he was exaggerating the everyday lives of these people, because they, like, for instance, they couldn't swim, and they would have them out at sea. It says to perform invented traditions in the sea. So basically they were trying to make it seem more than it was, even though a lot of the events that they exaggerated or fabricated didn't actually happen. And in this book, this will be a little bit of a spoiler, just so you know, the English people are sort of trying to do the same thing with the people on this fictional island. They're trying to make it out to be more than it is. They're exaggerating some of the fishermen, saying they hunt like some kind of shark or something. And I think that's it's really cool that it's inspired by actual events that happened in the 1930s. And I think it really brings a reality to the story, even though it's a work of fiction. It's, in my opinion, it seems sort of like, there's a word for the genre I'm thinking of, but like fictional history, or historical fiction is what I'm looking for. So we'll talk a little bit more about the plot of the novel. So another stylistic choice the author makes is to use months of the year to separate the chapters. And again, this sort of goes along with the pacing of the novel, because the reader is imagining the different seasons changing and them progressing through the months of the year. And eventually it leads up to a holiday. It's a pagan holiday I looked it up online, kind of looking into it, but I guess it's a Celtic holiday, and it's pagan, so it's like pre-Christian pagan holiday from what I've seen. And what it is they wear like a horse mask, like a horse skull. In the book, towards the end, they start celebrating this holiday, and then Tad, Menod's father, is wearing the horse mask and comes to their house, and they're sort of performing this ritualistic theatrics of the holiday. But the horse is supposed to represent a horse that was in the stable where Mary had Jesus, is supposedly what it is based upon. And Mary Lwyd actually means like pale horse, and supposedly the horse like can pass through the underworld. And it's really interesting how it's described. So apparently, the horse was pregnant, and it was like forced out of the stable where Mary had Jesus, which is really interesting. And it's not something I've ever heard, because it's pagan or pre-Christian, so it's not a typical story or piece of folklore that a lot of people know about. And I think that's really interesting that she adds that into here. So the research behind the novel, all the folklore and all the Gaelic language that's in the book that the characters are speaking, and then there's one instance of a sort of phantom that it's written in Gaelic, though the word for it I can't exactly remember, but you can really tell the author has put a lot of work into researching the surrounding area and the islanders that inspired this book. And her PhD in English really comes in handy in this book. And although it is a debut novel, it doesn't read like one, because of all the research and everything that goes into it. I think it was a smart move for Elizabeth O'Connor to do this, because she sort of has a basis for the fictional work that she's writing. But I thought that was really good. But so yeah, although the English woman in the book, like, she seems to want to help Manod at first, and eventually it leads to different emotions towards Manod. I'm not going to spoil exactly what happens there, because I don't want to do that for you, but I think the traditionalistic views of women in this book really show how they progress. And like I said about Manod, because she's wanting to get off this island and further education, and is, seeking this opportunity with the English people, because it's probably the first one she's had where she can use her education to better her position in life. You really desire for her to, move off of the island and go to the mainland and seek better opportunities. And the author talks about this in the author's note at the end. A lot of the people that were on these literal islands, the actual islands in real life that the book is based off of, has started to move away from the islands, because it's such a hard life They live on the fishermen that catch the lobsters and sell them in market, and it's really just a hard life. So a lot of people have moved over to the mainland, places like London, and England, and Ireland, rather than staying on these islands. So yeah, like I said, some of the really great parts of the novel are like the friendships in the family that they have. I think Linus and Manod's relationship is really nice because Linus is her younger sister, and she really feels an obligation to look after and protect her younger sister. And I think there's betrayal and, again, that desire for them to, lead better lives and move away and on from the island. I think this is really great. I think something that could be looked over is the depth of the individual characters, kind of showing that people aren't one-sided, and even though you think you may know someone initially, they could show another side to themselves. I think that's really portrayed really well in the novel. I think that's really great. Even though there may be some characters that you grow to dislike, I think it's good that the author shows that they're not just one-sided people, that they have more to them than may initially, what the reader may initially see, or a person may initially see in real life. So we'll go to some of my favorite quotes from the novel. So this is on page 35. It's a really beautiful quote. And I think this really speaks to the author's descriptions of like the coastal scenery and all that. I think she does a really great job of providing that imagery for the reader, and it really enhances the experience. So it says, "The shoreline shifted towards us with the sediment brought in by the waves. In the mornings, whole crowds of crabs scuttled in, washes of red and green. In the cliffs, the gorse grew thick with copper heather and white butterflies. The cow parsley curled brown." And the few plants that are described here, copper heather, and then gorse and cow parsley, I think they really just add another layer of depth to the story, because the author is really taking the time to research what plants and what kind of plant life would be on the island, rather than just attributing whatever type of flowers or greenery that she would like. But yeah, I think that's probably one of my favorite lines of the book as far as the imagery, is imagining the crowds of crabs, red and green crabs, washing onto the shore. That's really great. There's another quote in here. It says, "It was Halfbach." I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but "A little summer, the sun roasting for a few days on the turn of autumn." Thought that was really terrific. So there's another quote in this novel which kind of portrays the meaning or the message behind the book that I think is kind of out in the open, but it's still sort of hidden. And I think what it's trying to show is the progression of women from the 1930s until now, 2024, and how much we've come as a society, which I think it's really great. I think obviously we should continue this trend and recognize everyone as equal individuals who can live fulfilling and educational lives. But I think to a degree there will always be some kind of prejudice among people, just because some people just are bad. So, but here's what it says, and it's her mother speaking of the farm that she lived on to her kids, to Manod and to Linus. So she would tell them stories about how she grew up, and it says, "I was not suited to that life. She always said at the end of it, I couldn't read that land like my brothers did. Sometimes," she added, there's no job for a woman to get except wife." But it's really sad about this, and the story behind this quote is that the mother, Manod's mother, was setting snares to catch rabbits on their land, but it ended up being the farmer's land next door, And so the farmer took the rabbits that were caught in the snares, cut them open, urinated on them, and put them on their farmhouse door. And obviously, that's kind of like a horrific scene, and it sort of led to their mother like giving up the farm life and moving and just getting married and coming to the idea that there's nothing for women to do except get married. And again, this traditionalistic viewpoint is sort of shared by the islanders, that there's not really a whole lot for the women to do because they can't go out and fish because they have these superstitions against women fishing and helping with the boats because they think it's some kind of bad omen. And it's just, I think it's kind of pushed because of this old-fashioned misogynistic mindset, which is really sad. But I think the novel really does show how much we've moved on as a society from these types of unfounded prejudices. So we'll go over one more quote, which is towards the end of the novel. It says, "Tiny autumn leaves, a border of mussel shells. At dawn, I heard the goats cry aimlessly." I thought that was really nice. I think, well, a few of these sentences are fragments, which is a stylistic choice that some authors choose to use just to, make their sentences a little bit more choppy, and that way the individual parts can sound more impactful. And I think that's really cool stylistic choice. I think something really great about writing is there's really no restrictions to what you can do. You can really break all of the rules in writing, and that's like your liberty because it's not academic writing, and you can really push the boundaries with grammar and English properness because there's really no set guidelines. You can really just break some of the rules in fictional writing, which I think is really great when authors do that. So one of the characters, you realize that the English people are not who they say they are. And there's a part in the novel about 150 pages in where you start to kind of realize that they're over-exaggerating the details of the island in order to make a more fantastical book that will sell more copies or whatever they're really wanting out of it. But it says, an island family enjoys a picnic, no photograph. And then here's the part where you start to realize they're exaggerating details. So, a photograph of Caddock, a young island boy training to be a sheep farmer or fisherman of whale shark. And then she said, I had never heard of a whale shark, and they kept cattle. So he's not a fisherman. He raises cattle and does not fish whale shark. The man on it, I never even heard of that. So this is sort of where you start to realize that they're over-exaggerating details of the island in order to sell more books or whatever. I think that's the idea, is they want to make more money off of the book that they're going to write on this island. So they're exaggerating the details, and they're also taking advantage of Manod, which is around this point is where you find that out. So that's a bit of a spoiler, but not necessarily, because you won't necessarily know what I'm talking about until you get a little bit further into the novel. So the last thing I'll say is the ending lines. I really enjoyed this. It doesn't really give anything away. I just think it's very beautiful lines. If you don't want to hear it, you can skip over the next 30 seconds. But it said, I closed my eyes, the sea behind my eyelids turned the most brilliant red. When I looked again, the body was gone, the water bathing in its own light. I think this was really fantastic. I think the author does a really great job of describing the coastal scenery and providing that imagery for the reader. Additionally, I think because of her background as a PhD having a PhD in English literature and coastal landscapes, or I guess she's written about coastal landscapes before, but I think it really aided her in her research for this book. I think because it's sort of like a historical novel, I think that helps a lot to make it easier for the reader to believe. And I didn't even know until the end of the story that it was based on actual people who lived on similar islands off of the British Isles. So I think that speaks to how real the characters feel, and it's really terrific. I think the author does a great job of telling the story within like 200 pages. So like the brevity and the conciseness and succinctness is really great in this novel. I think she could have done more with the novel, but at a certain point you have to end it. I think it was ended well. I think she did end it well. I think there's almost always more you could tell of the story, but I think she did a great job of keeping it short and concise, and really telling a lot of story within a few amount of pages. So we'll give it a rating, and I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So I think this is probably at least a 4.8 out of 5. We'll say 4.7 just to be fair, not to rate it extremely highly. I really think it was terrific. Again, the friendships that are built and the connection between the readers and the characters feels very real. I think the betrayal between Maynard and the English people that come onto the island is, I think it's great. You really feel anguish for Maynard because she's been led to believe one thing, and unfortunately something else happens in the end. I'm not going to give away exactly what happens, but yeah, 4.8 or 4.7 out of 5. I think it was fantastic. Again, the imagery I think is probably one of the best parts of the novel, and again, I really appreciate the conciseness too, because it tells a lot very quickly, and it's only 200 pages. You could read this in 2 days if you really wanted to. I think I read it maybe in 4 or 5 days, kind of spaced it out a little bit, and I think it was 4 days, and I finished the rest in one night. I got to like 120 and then finished the rest in one sitting. But yep, that's all I gotta say. Whalefall, Elizabeth O'Connor, definitely check it out. If you have any thoughts, questions, opinions, definitely share them. If you have any recommendations for me as to what to read next, definitely let me know. And the next book I'll be reviewing is probably Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I'm about 100 pages into that book, and I think it's pretty good so far, but I think it'll be an interesting one to review because it is very long. I think it's 800 pages, the copy I have, but the pages are very dense. So it's really going to be an interesting one to review. So far, I'm only 100 pages in, and there's quite a big list of characters. So I think that'll be an interesting one to review as well. So if you guys read this, let me know. And that's it.